Every coach will face at some point an athlete who hurts the culture of the team. Most coaches, they will just try to get through these experiences. They will just try to survive a season where the culture cancer becomes a culture killer. So today we're going to dive into what makes this a challenge for every coach at every level. We're going to talk about what not to do and what you can do when your team has an athlete or a few athletes who are not just putting a ceiling on your culture, but they are compromising the very foundations of your team's culture. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. The mission of this podcast is to help you grow as a leader and build a stronger team culture. I'm JP Nerbun, joined by Nate Sanderson and Betsy Butterrick. We're going to go beyond theory and get really practical on what you can do within your team, regardless of the sport or level that you coach. You can get the notes to this in every episode, as well as tools for your culture at tocculture.com. Let's get right into today's conversation. All right, so today's topic is that of culture killers. I think there's actually a lot of different terms for this. I would say sometimes we call them the culture killer. Sometimes we might say the culture cancer. I actually sometimes think the cancer is a more appropriate word because I think sometimes athletes on our teams, it is a little bit less obvious. There's not this clear evidence. It's kind of hidden the behaviors that they're doing within a team that disrupt team culture. But either way, coaches, we always, at some point in our career, we're going to face them, and there's going to be constraints, right? You could be a youth coach and you've got, an under 14s team or a high school JV basketball team, and you've got that no cut policy and you're just stuck with that kid. You could be a pro basketball team and you have, a talented player that the fan base loves and they pay a lot of money to go see, and that coach is stuck with that superstar, right? And then there's all the things in between there where it's administrative support, political pressure to hold on to that player or to have a big roster. There's so many things. Every coach out there, we've had that player. We don't like what they're doing with our culture or what we think they're doing with our culture. And yet we feel, we're handcuffed, like we can't do anything about it. From your perspective, Nate, Betsy, how are you seeing this affect coaches and their ways of effectively leading their teams?
Yeah, I see it all the time, especially in the individual work that I do with coaches. And I think about it as, like they've got this player, often it's one, and it's tricky, I think, when there are extenuating circumstances. So, I've got this player that's really talented and we need them to win, but they're also toxic for our culture. Or I've got this kid that is the son or daughter of a influential person in our campus community, and so I need to keep them happy, right? Like there's all of these situations or circumstances that make it harder for coaches, or it makes it feel harder for coaches to do what they know is the right thing to do, but it's tricky. Or I brought this to my administration. My administration says I have to keep them. So all the points that you just mentioned, JP, but I see this come up a lot, regardless of the context, the situation, the circumstances. This, for me, observationally, is one of the more important decisions that a coach needs to make. Getting really clear, not just on your coaching philosophy, like not just on what you want to do, but how are you prepared or currently unprepared to handle the types of challenges that all coaches will come across at some point, where you have to work with someone that you don't necessarily choose to keep as part of your program. So what do you do? And that's really what I'm excited to unpack with both of you guys today.
Yeah, there's so much gray area and all that. Sometimes too for coaches, they're like, is it gone too far? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, as well as a transformational coach perspective, where we're like, hey, my mission is to help grow people and help impact people. So is this someone I can help? And can I still help them? What about you, Nate?
Well, I think, JP, your analogy to cancer is apt in a couple of ways. On the one hand, like sometimes the symptoms are a little bit hidden or sneaky in the beginning before it becomes debilitating, right? So if you think about, a player on the bench that comes out of a game and is frustrated and they throw a towel on their head, or, they're not engaged with the rest of their teammates or their substitute that came in for them, like that's not blowing up your culture on one rotation on a random Tuesday night. But if it's not addressed in some way, it's noticed. It starts to have a bit of an effect, right? And the thing that most coaches are probably the most afraid of is that tumor metastasizes, and a week later you've got two starters out that are whispering at the end of the bench, that are frustrated about their role and not paying attention and not being supportive. And all of a sudden, if that thing starts to spread, like you can, have a season from hell because it wasn't addressed at all. So certainly there are ways, as with an illness, like there are ways to have preventative medicine, but also, the sooner that you're able to start responding, typically the better chance you have of surviving a season like that. And as you said, both of you, everybody at every level goes through it in some way. So I think that's another, piece of this is like, this isn't just a big school problem or a professional problem or a performance problem. Like this is rec leagues through professional leagues, lots of different reasons, but everybody's going to deal with, in some way, players that are not necessarily aligned with the culture or the standards. And that's where, the skill of the coach can make a big difference one way or the other.
And I think one of the hardest things about this is that in all those situations, people feel like they don't have a lot of options.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think about the youth team that I'm coaching with my son's team. It's like, oh, here's a really difficult, challenging young individual. I don't have any options, right? Like we feel powerless. It's like, hey, it's a youth program. I mean, everyone's supposed to play. Everyone's supposed to participate. And yet we still have some responsibility. We do have options. We have responsibility to the team in that situation for the other kid's experience. If that kid is ruining from, taking from that. And the same thing is whether you're a pro coach, college coach, elite, a coach at elite level, you feel like at times like, I can't get rid of this, icon of the community or this, some of the scene. It's just, if we feel powerless, which is, I think why so many coaches struggle with this. Let's talk first about what doesn't work. Like what have we seen out there of approaches coaches have taken that seem to really just make things worse?
I mean, to Nate, your point, it's like the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. And we think like, well, it's just this one small thing. I don't need to address it right now. Or the coach knows the extenuating circumstances. And so they feel like, well, I'll just manage it. Right. And managing it sometimes means magical thinking of like, well, if I just don't make a big deal about it, maybe nobody else will notice, or I'm sure they understand, or, it's not really that big of a deal. And it is. And it's like every single little thing, that death by a thousand paper cuts type of situation where it's all these small things. And I know I've said frequently, what we permit, we promote. So every time we don't address something because, gosh, it'd be much easier not to in the moment, or I've got other things that I want to focus on. And sometimes with the best of intentions, like, I don't want to address this kid's behavior right now because I need to focus on the rest of my team. Okay. But then the next thing comes up after practice and we end up not addressing the behavior at all, not just with that kid, but in a way that would also show our team that we are committed to what we say we're going to hold them accountable for. And then things start to accumulate. So the longer we wait, the harder it gets. And the more, I'll say, power or permissiveness the individual feels to do more of the behavior that they're doing. And two things come up for me, JP, when you mentioned like that coach is like, well, but transformational coaching, like, can I help this person? Right? Like, I really want to help this person. And a conversation that I've had to have with a few coaches is when you're considering taking some sort of accountability action or disciplinary action with someone that's very problematic to your team or your culture, is to consider that perhaps the lesson that they learn through the discipline that you enact is going to help them, is going to allow them to grow in a way that they couldn't otherwise without this consequence. And it's really hard when we care and when we feel responsible to let people fail or to feel like we've hurt them, we've let them down, we've been one more person that's, told them no. But then I also speak with so many athletes that are like, you know what, coach did this thing this one time and I hated them for it, or it was so hard, or I thought it was unfair. It taught me a lesson that I've never forgotten. So to think about, if we're committed to care, care isn't just making it okay and treating them with love and, trying to do the best we can to help them. Sometimes care is enacting a consequence that gives them a larger perspective or allows them to make better choices in the future, even if that's not as part of our team.
JP, as a professional conflict avoider over the course of my career, I can attest, in situations where this hasn't gone well for a team that I've been a part of, a lot of the, problem from a leadership perspective is ignoring the symptoms. as Betsy said, I can't tell you how many times I come home and I think, oh, maybe, was that expression really that bad? Was their body language really that bad? Did they really say that thing in the locker room, that I hear back from a captain or something? And so the more rope that there is in the beginning, like the harder it is to pull it tight later on down the road. So just being aware and being proactive early, again, I think is important. Mistakes that I've made in the past are just assuming, number one, or hoping that it's not that big a deal, when the fact is it just continues to fester and to grow and possibly to spread. I've also just put my hope in, players will deal with it. Like, the seniors will take care of it. The leadership will take care of it. Given the speech, this is your team. And if you don't like what's going on here, then you're the ones that need to fix it. Like, essentially stiff arming any responsibility for myself and assuming that a 16 or 17-year-old that's not been given any training or any, any skills themselves to handle a situation like that is just going to magically fix it. Like, that doesn't work very well. And addressing the whole team when you're talking about one individual, like, we've got to be better teammates. We got to have each other's backs. We can't, blah, 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 blah. Like, everybody in the room knows who you're talking about, except the person that you're talking about, who's looking around going, yeah, guys, you idiots, what are you doing? Right. So all of that sort of dancing around the issue without really addressing it or engaging with the person, it just doesn't work. Like, it's just making that eventual confrontation or conversation more difficult, as Betsy said, that permission, when you allow those things and you don't coach those things, it just makes it much more difficult to rein in as the season goes along.
You guys hit on so many good points there. I just want to reiterate a few of them and add maybe one other one there too. There is this thing we fall into in transformational coaching, which is a bit of the hero complex. We're like, we can save everyone. And my wife and I, she likes to joke with me and jokingly say transformational coaching or transformational leadership is bullshit. And she says that because sometimes it feels so big. She's like, sometimes it's like, what am I supposed to, everyone's this cocoon. I'm gonna turn them into a butterfly, this little caterpillar into a butterfly. And it's like, like, that's just not going to happen for everyone in your team. I think that's a bit of the reality. And yet I still believe passionately about transformational leadership and what we can do in the lives of our athletes. But I do think we too often have the hero complex. Like, we're trying to save everybody in our program. And when we do that, I think we don't navigate the gray very well. And we start to have a lot of grace and a lot of support, which you absolutely need. But I also know this: players that struggle the most with meeting the standard and with you enforcing the standard are the ones that oftentimes need it the most, because they don't have the people in their life. I think about the young men I've had coached. They don't have the father there. And so, or they don't have someone there that's holding that standard for him. And it's like, they needed somebody. They're crying out for somebody. And I think so often our athletes, they're craving that accountability. And the beautiful story of Boomer Roberts, which we'll link in the details of this episode. Boomer Roberts was at Purdue Northwest, a college basketball coach. And I recounted the story in the Culture Killer episode or episode chapter of my book. Is like, he let go of a good player at the end of his junior year. The player landed up in a good spot. And that player came back and hugged him a year later and was like, thank you. Like, you gave me what I needed in that moment, right? So boundaries and the discipline and the accountability, like, to your point, Betsy, it's like maybe what they need more than ever. And so I just think that's a good point there.
Oh, and as you're talking, JP, I'm thinking about that quote, and I believe I read it in an educational context. It absolutely falls into a parenting context, but the quote says, "Those most in need of love will often ask for it in the most unloving ways." And so when I see behavior from anybody, whether it's a child or an adult, where my curiosity goes is, okay, what's the unmet need here? And to your point, like, those that rile against the boundaries, the structure, the accountability, you can't fence me in, I'm not going to comply. It's often because that chaos is the only thing they've known. And the safety and structure that we can provide through transparency, through consistency, through articulating and holding the boundaries that we say that we're committed to, that can be maybe the first time that that's ever happened in a kid's life. And it can be very different at practice from what it looks like at home. And that can be a big challenge when a kid's like, no, like, this isn't familiar. and this is different. And so, of course, I'm going to resist this thing. So I think, Nate, you'd mentioned it in our conversation before we started recording about that curiosity of like, what's really going on here? What am I making it mean? That's a question I often ask and encourage others to ask is, what am I making it mean, this behavior that I'm seeing? And also, what does it really mean for the kid? And for me, so much of working with our culture killers is starting with awareness. So having conversations, yes, to make the whole team aware of what is in and out of bounds, aware of consequences, aware of expectations, aware of standards, etc. And with the individual, helping them become more aware of the choices that they're making. And I know you said early, JP, so many coaches feel like, well, I don't really have a lot of choice in this. I don't have a lot of control. Even within the limitations of the situation a coach finds himself in, they still do have often more choices than they feel are immediately available to them. It's just unpacking, getting into the nitty-gritty of like, okay, I don't have a choice. I have to keep this kid on my roster. I do have a choice about the awareness I create with the team, the awareness I create with this individual, the ways that I help reshape the behavior, knowing that while I might want to help this person as the transformational, cocoon to butterfly coach that I am, they also have to want to help themselves. And that's one of the hardest parts about care is you can't help those that are unwilling or unable to also help themselves. There's limitations there. And so sometimes the choice that we have is recognizing, have I done what I can to support this person? And where have I run up against their ability or inability to help themselves in this situation?
There's two things that are really, really important there. You just touched on there. Like you can't change others. You can only invite them to change. Right.
Right.
And at some point we got to like surrender that control. There's something that I know you've probably gone through in your executive coaching training, and Nate, you're probably going through now, that I've gone through as well, too, that I think we have to pay attention to, which is intuition. And that intuition where we have a sense that things aren't right. Because sometimes there's, like we said, it's like the culture cancer, right? It's in there. We sense it, our intuition saying this isn't right. This player's not bought in. They're having a negative effect on the team. I don't have like all this hard fact, actual evidence of all these behaviors, but I know this is a problem. We have to be able to trust our intuition, but still remain curious. Not that our intuition is telling us the cold hard facts, but it's just saying, go explore further. It says, go look a little bit there. Like in coaching, you might have this sense that there's something in that, what that person just said to you. And you just say, tell me more about what you just said there. Right. And this is the same thing with an athlete. It's like, I have this intuition that something's going on there. To your point, Betsy, it's like, I'm seeing this or I'm sensing this. Tell me a little bit more about what's going on there. I think trusting our intuition as a coach, whereas I think what doesn't work is, nope, don't have the cold hard facts. And I need cold hard facts before I do anything. And that absolutely does not work, right? Because you're never always going to have all the facts, right? You can't have a camera on them 24/7, 365, right? And you can't see inside their mind. And I don't think you would want to.
Yeah. What's scary though is that that's become almost an expectation from administrators, from parents, and from teammates. And I've had conversations with coaches where the feedback being given to parents and administration about the coach is coach supports a toxic culture. And the reality when speaking with the athletes and with the coach is all of the toxic behaviors from one or two people related to the team culture are happening in spaces where the coach is not present. So there's an expectation that the coach is supposed to change this toxic culture in spaces where the coach has no cold hard facts. Not only that, the coach has no immediate influence or power because they're not present. So again, awareness, level setting expectations. What are your expectations of me as a coach to manage toxicity within our culture in spaces where I'm not present? And at best, I'm hearing conversations secondhand. Whose responsibility is it not to point the finger, but to create the awareness that if you are experiencing toxicity in a way that you say is important for you to change, let's change the conversation. Let's talk about what choices you have. Let's talk about things you can say in those moments to let the other person know that their choice or behavior is out of alignment with what's healthy and beneficial and supportive for you. We got to really focus on what's the conversation we really need to have here. What are the expectations? How do we create awareness? How do we create shared responsibility? Because culture is never one person's responsibility. And it certainly doesn't live in the words on a piece of paper in a notebook that they've put away and never forgotten. Like culture is the
Mhm.
lived experience of people who share space and the choices that they make on a daily basis. So let's talk about those.
I do think there's a couple important distinctions to make here. We could go down this rabbit hole, and I'm just going to lightly touch on it, but there is a difference between behaviors that are in the team concept and behaviors that are happening outside of it, where, you may not get backing from administration to sit a kid because you heard that they were back talking, their teammates, or bad mouthing the coaching staff, or threatening to transfer, or whatever. Like, if that's hearsay, you may not have the backing to do that, or you make that decision and then parents come, into the administrator's office up in arms saying, how can he do something like this without any proof? Like, that can create, a situation that is not, productive for the coach. It doesn't mean that you just allow those things to happen, but one of the ways to be more proactive is to, just engage with curiosity with a player. So if you're hearing from the captain's council, you're hearing from somebody that looks so and so, keeps bashing the coach's decisions, in the dorm room at night or on the bus ride home or whatever, like, just bringing that player in and saying, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard it enough times that it makes me wonder what's going on here. And that gives the player an opportunity either to be honest and say, okay, coach, here's what is pissing me off right now, or here's where I'm at, here's what I'm feeling, here's why I'm angry, or they can dodge, right? And that's a choice that they, make, but at least you've kind of put them on notice that there's an awareness of behavior here that is affecting the team. And I think this is another important distinctions that you guys may not agree with me on this, but I do think that, and this is Dale Sanderson, my father, speaking here, like, there is a difference between behavior that is detrimental to the individual and behavior that is detrimental to the team. So if Betsy is playing for me and chooses not to stay after practice and get extra shots up, and therefore, is not in rhythm and she's not getting, like, that's going to affect Betsy, but that may not necessarily bring the culture down. I think about it in the classroom. You may have a kid that's not doing the homework and they're going to fail, but they aren't bringing the whole class atmosphere down. Like, we've had class killers before, right, where their behaviors make it impossible to teach. That's a completely different situation and probably requires different care when you're working with someone whose behavior is detrimental to themselves, but maybe they're isolated from the team and everybody sort of looks at them and rolls their eyes because they, maybe they're not meeting the standard, but it's contained in a way that it doesn't affect everyone else. Like, I've had seasons where we found equilibrium with that and we've been able to get through it. But it's a lot different when the behavior is affecting everybody else's ability to play, perform, or to show up in a way that honors, who we want to be.
I think there's several constraints that we're always out trying to operate in. And one that you both have alluded to too is the level of transparency that we can have. We'll reference this episode as well in the details. It was a great one at American International College, Division I ice hockey program. Eric Lang, who turned that program around, he talked about they kind of have a culture of radical transparency, which is like, if there's a discipline or behavioral issue over here with Betsy, I'm not just going to keep it between me and Betsy as a coach. Like, it's a shared issue. We're going to all talk about it. And I think that is an ideal place to go oftentimes in this, because so often, like Betsy, you mentioned, like, I could be actually even doing something about it, but people don't know about that I'm actually addressing it. It's just not necessarily at the pace that they would want, right? So I think the more we can have that type of culture and try to create that culture from the outset as a hey, we're going to have honest conversations around when we scan our culture, when we start to see issues come up here, and we're just going to put them out there, right? I think you're always trying to create that culture but I think a lot of coaches feel constrained because they're like, no, I can't share that. Like, that could come back to bite me, that I, talked about an issue with Nate, in front of Betsy and Nate, like that I'm gossiping about players. So I think there's an element that we have to be working to create that culture as well.
Yeah, and as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about so one of the constraints that I've heard articulated here and that many coaches experience is, well, I can't kick this kid off my team. I know that they're not good for the culture. Nate, to your point, they're making choices that are detrimental to the individual and the team, but I can't kick them off. I'm powerless to do so. Okay, you can't kick them off, but you can give them an out. And this isn't manipulation to force them to decide to spend their time other places, but you can make choices within the conversations you have, yes. Also, the consequences that are appropriate given their choice of behavior or words. You can have a conversation with them that leaves a door open. Like, this is what we're about. This is what I'm going to be holding you and everybody else accountable for. The choices that you make will influence the consequences that you experience. And if at any point you decide, you know what, this isn't for you, like, I respect that decision and you have my support to spend your time in other pursuits. So sometimes the behavior is really resistance of like, I don't want to do this. My parents are paying for me to play and I hate this sport, but they played and so now I'm here. Like giving kids an out sometimes is something that starts to move the needle because when they understand that while you might have to keep them, that you don't necessarily want to, or that you even support their decision to not be here, sometimes people double down on, "No, no, no, I do wanna be here, like, I am committed to our team culture." It's like, you often see a shift in behavior for the positive when they know that it's not about you kicking them off, it's about, "Hey, man, if this isn't how you wanna spend your time, there's other choices you can make."
I love that clarity, and I just think that's such a great thing of reminding the individual they're at choice, which is why I know I talk about it so often, but I love progressive consequences, right? So I think this is one of the best ways to address this in a lot of settings, especially at the youth, high school, even collegiate level, is those progressive consequences of, hey, the effort wasn't there, do it again. Or, hey, you're going to have a bad attitude, just step off. And when you're ready to come back in the drill, you come right back in. Or if the attitude is really disruptive to the whole practice, even their presence you feel is affecting your ability to coach in the team's environment, you say, hey, we'll see you tomorrow. Just come back, see if you can have a better attitude and be ready to work. You're reminding them of the choice and you're that they have an option. And I think like the most extreme example that I've seen is a coach had a player that could not cut, they could not remove, they didn't have administration backing, but they didn't have to let them practice. They could just say, hey, your attitude is unacceptable, sit down. And they kept doing that, and it went on for weeks, over a month, and eventually the player said, I'm out. They opted out. And a more positive example is, I tell in the culture system, is young man there, and I thought he was going to opt out, but he had a turnaround. Eventually he got through him, and I sat him multiple games. I got heat from his parents. He's the best player on our team. But I was like, I'm not doing it again. I had this before last year. Best player, culture, killer, cancer. But I allowed it. I allowed that to grow. But by kind of like nipping it in the bud constantly and addressing that, reminding them that they had a choice, that person made the choice. Now, at the end of the day, the person needs to be celebrated is that individual, right? They had a huge transformation and they made the choice. But I just kept reminding them of the choice. I think that's a key piece. So I love that, Betsy.
JP, if I can add to that too, a valuable conversation that we used to have at the beginning of the year, like preseason meeting, or when you're talking about standards and maybe above the line, below the line behavior, is what is a legitimate playing time disqualifier in your eyes, talking with the team and with the players. So if a player is disrespectful to an official and gets a technical, does that, no matter how good they are, does that automatically disqualify them from continuing the game? Or if they get into dust up with a player from another team, whatever. And so we kind of went through, some of those possibilities, and that became a page that we had in our handbook that, sent to the parents as well. Like, the best players are going to play and give us the best chance to win, but this is an automatic trap door, and everybody's aware of it right at the beginning. If these things happen, you're disqualified from playing. And I think that could be, applied to practice as well. I know, JP, you're obviously a big advocate of restorative consequences too. And I remember just, a story from years ago when we were at a team camp, 2-day camp, and we had a kid that was really on the end of the bench, just, playing a little bit kind of in mop up time or sparing minutes as we went through the first day. And she just had a really bad attitude, on the bench, and players had come to me afterwards after the first day about it. And so we talked as a coaching staff, and basically I decided that we were going to have a conversation with her before we left the next day that said, until you demonstrate that you're the best teammate on our bench, I'm not going to allow you to represent our team on the floor, even in the summer. And before we had this conversation, I called our AD to make sure that, one, he was aware of the situation, because her parents paid for her to be able to be part of this too, and made sure that he, A, understood, and B, was going to back, as soon as mom called, that he would back that decision. And so we sat her down and had this conversation, and she just started crying about all the expectations and pressure she was carrying and blah, 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 and was so dedicated. The first 2 games of that camp, carrying the basketballs, having the water for everybody, standing up and, greeting people when they came off the court, that in the 3rd game, we're like, okay, she's back and she belongs. But she had to demonstrate that, not just to us as coaches, but to her teammates, that she was willing to step up to that standard that we had talked about, And we didn't have an issue with her at all during that season, even though that was maybe somebody we were a little bit concerned about. How are we going to manage this? So I think like creating a clear choice and a clear path, that was an example of a kid that chose to step up and be heard and then also change her behavior. And it was beneficial for everyone for the long term.
And as we start to wrap up, JP and Nate, just building off of that and coming back to the choice piece, right? Like you make it clear, you articulate what choices they have, and there are going to be consequences. And I know so many coaches feel hamstrung by the consequences or potential consequences, the fear, right? Like, what if I do this? If I do this, I'm so afraid of the repercussions. I'm afraid of the complaints. Afraid of the, the public opinion. I'm afraid we're going to lose if I take this action. And for me, this is a choose your hard moment. Like, yes, it's hard to bench your best player because of their behavior detrimental to team culture. Yes, it's hard to hold this individual accountable because their response to being held accountable in the past makes you believe that it's not going to go well or because of who their parents are or whatever. This is hard. And it's also hard when you don't do those things and you lose the rest of your team, whether it's the respect, whether it's their buy-in to your culture. Like, this is a choose your heart, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I hear that a lot from coaches. But thinking long term, the hard thing that you are afraid of doing because of what might come after, is that harder than not doing the thing and having different consequences affect your ability to effectively run your team? Because if you're concerned about your culture, anytime you allow people who are culture killers to continue to exist in your system, what you're telling the rest of your team is you don't really care about your culture. You care about your culture when it's convenient. You care about your culture when you feel like it won't have too many negative impacts. But if you truly care about your culture, then you have to take the actions and make the hard decisions that prioritize the culture over the quick, easy fixes that feel more accessible, more comfortable. And that's a really tough reality for a lot of coaches to live in. And I feel that.
Mm. The hard thing and the right thing are often the same thing.
Yeah.
And it sucks when you're in that space. And I think we want simple answers. Like we want simple solutions. And I think that's one of the hard things about consequences too in this space. Like we want I loved this one, which was a restorative consequence where athlete quits the team mid-season, wants to come back. And the team sat down with the leadership. The coach sat down with the leadership group. It's like, well, they want to come back. What's their path to coming back? And they said, okay, this person could serve the team. They're going to serve the team drinks all during team camp for a whole week. And they're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, great. That athlete did it. Trust was built, came back. Good story, right? But it's not always that clean. Like I love Nate's point there too. It's like until I feel like it's a much more qualitative. Until I feel like you are the best teammate on the bench, I can't trust you on the floor. Had a coach there years ago, big issue, big blow up, athlete with tens, 100,000 followers makes a passive aggressive post about the team and not getting the ball. Ooh, how do you come back from this? I don't know. But one of our values is trust. Until I feel like I can trust you, you're not back. You're not playing. And I think there's that complexity, and that's a hard thing to do, is to step in there and not have always a simple answer, simple solution, to navigate the gray of these things. But it's necessary, I think, in this space there, because otherwise this is going to grow. This cancer will take over, and we'll have failed to do our responsibility, or failed our responsibility to the team in that situation.
JP, I think what I would leave coaches with too is just, you're not going through this thing alone. Like, engage your assistant coaches. Sometimes, an assistant coach has been able to get through to a player or get more out of a player in that one-on-one conversation than what I ever could. So my follow-up conversation is way more informed because I allowed, the assistant JV coach to make the connection because they had a previous relationship. And maybe my ego says, oh, I got to handle this thing, and I got to come in guns a-blazing. But just allowing an assistant coach, or on the captain's council, if you have squad leaders, or we've had this conversation where, we see behavior and we're concerned about it. The captains are concerned about it. And then the question is, okay, who is best to have the conversation with this kid? And sometimes a captain will say, I got it. We've been playing together since we were 8. We've been dealing with this ever since we started. I know how to talk to her. And she does. I don't even necessarily hear how the conversation goes or what happens, but like trying to navigate the whole thing with only your own perspective without engaging assistants or captains or administrators or even the kids' parents sometimes, like only handcuffs you more. And so the more we can collaborate, typically, if nothing else, it's better to have company in misery.
So if you enjoyed today's conversation and you want more on how to manage culture killers, the last chapter of my book, The Culture System, addresses this very challenge. We'll put a link in the details of this episode, or you can just head on over to Amazon and search The Culture System. This is also the type of thing that we don't just cover in the Culture System course in TOC Coach, but it's the type of conversations we're having in our community chat and our live trainings within TOC Coach. TOC Coach is our online community, courses, and coaching platform. So join today. It's affordable and practical, and it will help you develop not just as a coach and as a leader, but it's going to give you the practical tools and resources you need to build your team's culture next season. Visit tocculture.com to learn more. And when you hop into TOC Coach, that's a great way to ask us questions about today's episode or any other episode. Just hop on in, ask us a question, chat with us about the challenge that you are currently facing. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, please share it with others and leave us a review.